Okay, let's unpack this. Welcome back to the deep dive. Today, we are attempting to chart the life of a figure who is, well, perhaps the world's greatest living literary paradox, Paulo Coelho. We aren't just looking at an author. We are diving deep into a life story that is, frankly, more dramatic, more chaotic, and more unbelievable than the fiction he creates.
It's absolutely essential to frame Coelho not simply as a novelist. He's a global phenomenon who stands precisely at the intersection of, intense spiritual searching, colossal commercial success, and surprisingly harsh literary criticism.
Right.
The stack of sources we've prepared for you, it details an incredible, almost cinematic trajectory. From a rebellious Brazilian teenager navigating involuntary confinement and, the brutal military dictatorship, to the author of The Alchemist.
And The Alchemist, I mean, that novel is the inescapable center of his universe. The statistics attached to it are just staggering. They set him apart from virtually every other author writing today.
They really do.
We are talking about confirmed sales of 320 million copies worldwide. It's been translated into 83 languages, and his work is published in over 170 countries. That is a reach that, it just transcends language, culture, and borders.
And that scale of success, it forces us to ask some really deep questions. Our mission today is to trace this contradictory path, starting with his birth in Rio de Janeiro on August 24th, 1947, mapping his dangerous, politically volatile youth.
And then examining that delayed start as a writer.
Exactly. And finally, analyzing his ultimate enshrinement as a national cultural figure with his induction into the Brazilian Academy of Letters in 2002.
So the core mission for you, the learner, is to understand the turning points and the surprising contradictions that explain this massive, almost impossible global appeal. How did a man whose early life was defined by extreme, sometimes violent rebellion against all forms of authority become the ultimate mainstream sage?
The author whose simple parables about following one's destiny resonate with, 300 million people?
It's incredible. So let's begin with the chaos of his early years. When we talk about Coelho's beginnings, we are not talking about a quiet, studious childhood. Not at all. His life before fame was marked by this intense personal struggle and open conflict with the conventional expectations of the upper-middle-class family he grew up in.
Yes.
We absolutely must start with the dramatic and, frankly, terrifying intervention undertaken by his parents when he was just a teenager.
This period, starting when he was 17, is the psychological bedrock of the freedom themes that, permeate all of his work. His parents, they were frustrated by his rebellious nature, his rejection of the established path.
And his intense desire to be a writer.
Exactly, which they saw as totally unstable. So they took the truly drastic measure of committing him to a mental institution.
And committing a child to an institution today is, it's an act of last resort. But in the context of the 1960s, especially in a country under authoritarian rule, it takes on an even darker tone.
It does.
We aren't talking about some luxury wellness clinic.
Yeah.
This was a coercive environment.
Absolutely. The sources describe a deeply traumatic period. This was a time when psychiatric facilities, well, they often lacked modern standards, and institutionalization was used, sometimes quite effectively, to enforce social conformity.
So it was a tool.
It was a severe form of intervention. What's so telling about Coelho's spirit is that this wasn't just confinement he endured. It was confinement he actively fought. He escaped.
3 times.
3 separate times before finally securing his definitive release at the age of 20.
Escaping 3 times, that suggests an almost primal rejection of being controlled. It highlights this unshakable will to define his own reality, which is, of course, exactly what the protagonists in his later novels all try to do.
Precisely. That physical struggle against the bars of the institution, it became the metaphor for his later struggle against the invisible bars of societal expectation.
That's a great way to put it.
It really imbues his eventual writings on destiny and liberation with an undeniable weight. He is writing from experience, not just abstract philosophy.
But isn't there a risk that by adopting his later, more philosophical view, that his parents were trying to save him, that he downplays the genuine lifelong trauma of involuntary institutionalization? How do the sources balance that?
That's a critical question, and it really speaks to the power of retrospective framing. Coelho himself, reflecting years later, offered a stunningly empathetic, almost forgiving perspective on it.
What did he say?
His quote provides an essential insight into that dynamic. He said, "It wasn't that they wanted to hurt me, but they didn't know what to do. They did not do that to destroy me. They did that to save me."
That reframing is immensely powerful. It suggests they weren't motivated by malice, but by profound fear.
Exactly.
Fear of the chaos he was embracing, fear of the nonconformity, and fear of where that rebellious path might lead him, especially in the repressive social environment of 1960s Brazil.
Yes. They saw their brilliant but fiercely nonconformist son choosing a path that seemed guaranteed to lead to poverty or, danger, especially when you compare it to the stable, respectable career they envisioned for him.
Law school.
Right, law school. They were desperately trying to impose a conventional path on a deeply unconventional spirit. For Coelho, internalizing this as an act of misguided love, rather than outright cruelty, was likely a necessary psychological step toward moving past the trauma.
So that battle for personal destiny versus external expectation, whether it came from his parents or later the state, it becomes the central conflict of his entire life narrative.
It really does. The forced confinement became a crucible that solidified his resolve. It transformed that early trauma into a deeply marketable, lifelong theme of liberation.
And the rebellion didn't stop there.
Oh, not at all. After his release, the path his parents had desperately tried to enforce, attending law school, was almost instantly rejected. He enrolled as they wished.
What, he dropped out?
After just 1 year, he consciously abandoned the idea of the safe, established profession.
So dropping out wasn't just a rejection of law. It was him rejecting the dream of being a writer, as defined by conventional standards. He saw the expectation, and he just walked away from it entirely, embracing the counterculture lifestyle fully.
And that rejection of the law school path launched him straight into the heart of the global counterculture movement. He became a self-described hippie, diving headfirst into years of intense exploration.
This wasn't a gap year.
Not at all.
Yeah.
We're talking about extensive travel, a lifestyle defined by movement across South America, North Africa, Mexico, and Europe. This wasn't a brief backpacking trip. It was a fundamental lifestyle choice.
That extensive period of travel and nonconformity is so key. It grounds his later spiritual explorations in gritty, real-world experience, often on the margins of society.
And the sources confirm this was a period characterized by drug use and a deliberate break from societal norms. It paints a picture of a young man intensely searching.
Bouncing from one extreme to another.
Exactly, from the extreme confinement of the institution to the extreme freedom of the open road and, the acid tests of the 1960s. He was gathering the human material, the stories, the philosophical questions, the feeling of being an outsider that would eventually connect with millions of people globally.
It's so true. If he had gone straight from school to a desk job, his writing would be purely theoretical. But because he lived the life of intense exploration, the spiritual guidance he offers decades later carries that essential authenticity.
He walked the difficult path first.
So after years of this intense self-exploration, Coelho returns to Brazil and channels that dramatic energy into his first successful professional endeavor. And it's one that I think very few people today associate with the author of The Alchemist.
Right. He became a lyricist.
A highly successful one.
This is a vital transitional phase. It shows his innate skill in storytelling and rhythm long before he ever wrote novels. Upon returning, he immediately began composing lyrics for some of the most iconic and high-profile Brazilian artists of the era.
We're talking major names.
Huge names like Elas Regina and Rhea Lee, and perhaps most importantly, the legendary Raul Seixas.
And that collaboration with Raul Seixas is especially crucial, isn't it?
Yeah.
Because that's where his intense philosophical leanings started to get him into professional and eventually physical trouble.
Absolutely, years before he published his first novel.
And what's fascinating here is how the artistic content instantly became controversial and politically charged.
It did. The work he did with Raul Seixas led directly to Coelho being openly associated with magic and occultism. The songs were filled with these esoteric philosophical concepts, and they were pushing the boundaries of what was publicly acceptable in a conservative society already under authoritarian rule.
They weren't just pop songs.
No, they were carrying complex, mystical baggage.
That sounds dangerous enough in that repressive political climate, but the sources also detail an often overlooked creative controversy that shadowed his early success.
Yes, this adds another layer of complexity to the image of the fearless artistic rebel. The sources mention accusations that some of the songs he co-wrote were, and I'm quoting here, rip-offs of foreign songs not well known in Brazil at the time.
Mm-hmm.
Now, you could chalk this up to the murky ethics of the 1970s music industry, but it suggests an opportunistic side to his creativity in those early years, where fast success might have superseded stricter originality.
But any debate over artistic originality was quickly and violently dwarfed by the real physical danger imposed by the state. This is where the stakes became terrifyingly real.
This is where it gets serious.
Mm.
In 1974, at the height of the military dictatorship's power, Coelho was arrested and tortured. We have to emphasize the severity of the context here. The ruling military government was a highly authoritarian regime.
They'd seized power a decade earlier.
Right. They controlled the media, they censored the arts, and they brutally suppressed any perceived dissent. For an artist, arrest by the state was not a minor inconvenience. It meant immediate physical jeopardy.
So if the parents confined him out of fear for his soul, the state confined and tortured him out of fear for its own stability. What was the government's specific rationale for targeting a lyricist?
Their rationale was chillingly clear. They viewed his lyrics associated with occultism, nonconformity, all that esoteric questioning, as left-wing and dangerous.
So they saw it as a political act.
A subversive activity. That's how they classified his artistic production. This confirms that the intellectual and spiritual exploration he was engaged in was perceived not just as cultural rebellion, but as a direct, genuine political risk to the regime.
It's an amazing parallel, being punished by two different kinds of authorities, his parents and then the state, for the exact same nonconformist spirit. It gives so much weight to his life story.
It creates an almost unbreakable narrative thread of persecution and endurance. And the psychological impact of being tortured for your philosophical beliefs is immense. It moves the act of writing from a simple artistic choice into an act of courage, of survival, of necessity.
He survived the absolute limit of state power aimed at silencing him.
He did.
And that proximity to physical danger for his beliefs, it makes his later global success much more than just a lucky break. It means his message of overcoming obstacles. It's battle-tested. It adds an undeniable gravity to the narrative voice in The Alchemist.
And it's crucial to note that before he settled into being a full-time novelist, he was actively honing his skills in other performance and narrative-driven roles. He worked as an actor, a journalist, and a theater director.
These roles might seem disparate, but they are so crucial to understanding his eventual commercial success as an author. What specific skills did those roles provide him?
Well, they provided the essential dramatic structure and clarity that defines his literary style. Acting and theater directing require a deep, intuitive understanding of pacing, dialogue, character motivation.
How to structure a scene for maximum impact.
Exactly,
Yeah.
for maximum emotional impact and immediate audience comprehension. Journalism requires brevity and clarity. So when he finally transitioned to fiction, he leveraged all these skills. It allowed him to create dramatic, fast-paced, and easily digestible parables.
Stories that move quickly and speak directly to the emotional core of the reader.
He knew how to hold an audience's attention.
Okay, so after surviving psychiatric confinement, a dangerous counterculture existence, state torture, and establishing the successful yet politically risky songwriting career, Coelho finally experienced the profound spiritual and professional reorientation that led him directly to his first major work.
We're fast-forwarding to 1986.
And that year marks the crucial inflection point. It's the deliberate and conscious decision to walk away from his established success and commit to writing fiction.
And this shift wasn't a slow realization. It was precipitated by a profound physical and spiritual journey, walking the 500-plus-mile road of Santiago de Compostela in northwestern Spain.
The Camino, a journey that's intrinsically linked to transformation and self-discovery. Millions have walked it seeking clarity, but for Coelho, it literally reset his professional identity.
It transformed him from a lyricist into a writer of spiritual philosophy. That journey resulted in a profound spiritual awakening, which he instantly captured in his 1987 autobiographical account, The Pilgrimage.
And that book, which detailed his walk and the lessons he learned, was the prerequisite for his most famous novel. It showed his ability to transform personal experience into a universally resonant narrative.
It did.
What's remarkable about this moment is that the transition wasn't driven by professional or financial desperation. He was successful. It was driven by an unfulfilled calling, a spiritual need that money couldn't solve.
His own words from that year capture this perfectly. And it articulates the central conflict that so many people relate to. He reflected, saying, "In 1986, I was very happy in the things I was doing. I had money, but I was not fulfilling my dream. My dream was, and still is, to be a writer."
That quote is the thematic essence of all his subsequent fiction, especially The Alchemist. It's the idea that external success, having money, having love, having professional stability, is fundamentally hollow if you haven't realized your true individual purpose.
Your personal legend.
Your personal legend. He wasn't just preaching that message. He was living the dramatic, uncertain decision to chase it.
The Camino walk itself, the physical act of traversing that ancient, challenging path, became the central, enduring metaphor for destiny that permeates his entire body of work. He forced himself into a physical and mental state where he had no choice but to confront that deferred dream.
He had money, but he was starving his soul.
The source makes that very clear.
So, the decision to leave a lucrative, stable career for an uncertain literary path is difficult enough. But then he faced the greatest hurdle for any creative person: procrastination and self-doubt. And we have that compelling anecdote he used to push past that inertia.
Yes, the moment that directly launched the writing of The Alchemist. It's a classic and highly relatable struggle for anyone facing a huge creative endeavor. Coelho overcame this paralysis by setting a prophetic, almost magical condition for himself.
The white feather.
The white feather. He decided he would only write a new book if he saw a white feather that day, viewing it as a clear divine sign, a tangible confirmation from God or the universe.
It's a fantastic, slightly whimsical story of combining deep spiritual belief with, a psychological self-nudge. He needed an external sign to validate an internal ambition.
And of course, a sign appeared.
Of course, he saw one in a shop window, took it as his cue, and started writing The Alchemist that very day.
The white feather anecdote is critical because it perfectly encapsulates his philosophy and his methodology. He seeks external, almost magical confirmation to validate internal artistic ambition.
It turns the often solitary and mundane act of writing into a divinely sanctioned mission.
Exactly. It transforms creative effort into a form of spiritual obligation. And this belief that the universe actively conspires to help you if you simply ask and commit is the exact psychological mechanism that millions of readers would later cling to in his books.
The white feather wasn't just a sign, it was the birth of his brand. It confirmed the magical alignment between destiny and effort. With the white feather seen and the mandate received, it's easy to assume the immediate success of The Alchemist. But the historical reality is exactly the opposite.
The road to becoming a global phenomenon was paved with false starts, significant self-doubt, and initial, crushing commercial failure.
We have to acknowledge his two previous, less successful attempts at writing books, which helped put The Alchemist's delayed success into sharp context.
Right. In 1982, he published Hell Archives, which, according to our sources, failed to make any substantial impact on the market. It just disappeared.
And then there was the other one.
Then, just before the Camino in 1986, he contributed to the Practical Manual of Vampirism, and that's a book he actively tried to scrub from the record later.
He saw it as something of an embarrassment.
Exactly. He later considered it of bad quality and took steps to have it removed from bookstore shelves. So his first attempts were either entirely ignored or actively regretted by the author himself. He didn't just stumble into The Alchemist.
Okay, so then came The Alchemist in 1988, the book that would eventually redefine global publishing. And yet, initially, it was an undeniable, spectacular failure. Let's detail the scale of that rejection.
It was a heartbreaking false start for a writer who had fought so hard for his dream. It was published by a tiny Brazilian publishing house that only committed to a minuscule print run of just 900 copies.
900.
And the decision they made after selling through those 900, they chose not to reprint it. They basically abandoned the book entirely.
Abandoned. The book that would go on to sell 320 million copies was, for a time, considered a commercial dead end by its original publisher. This initial failure is so crucial because it debunks the myth of instant destined success.
It really does.
He had the dream, he had the sign, he had the manuscript, but the market and the traditional publishing structures initially rejected it completely.
Which highlights his immense persistence. He didn't quit after the rejection. He found a bigger publisher who was willing to take a chance on him. And the real change, the ignition, it didn't happen with The Alchemist itself.
It happened with his next book.
Right, after the publication of his next book, Brida, in 1990, once Brida started gaining traction and momentum, readers looked backward, discovered The Alchemist, and that stalled masterpiece finally started to move.
So it was a chain reaction. A slow burn success that relied on the momentum of his subsequent work. But the true global explosion happened 4 years later.
Yes. The slow momentum in Brazil culminated in the massive global leap when the U.S. publisher HarperCollins picked it up and published it in 1994. Suddenly, what was a successful Brazilian novel became an international bestseller overnight.
And that American publication was the final catalyst.
It launched the book into the global stratosphere.
The sources also point to a clear philosophical underpinning that structured the novel. It wasn't simply a motivational tale. It was rooted in specific, stated spiritual traditions.
Absolutely. Coelho confirmed that the Sufi tradition was a key and intentional influence on him. He specifically mentioned its role not only in shaping the core narrative of The Alchemist, but also his later novel, The Zahir.
And for those unfamiliar, Sufism is the mystical, ascetic path of Islam, focused on the inner, spiritual journey toward God or truth. How does that connect to the narrative of a shepherd boy seeking treasure?
Well, Sufism emphasizes the importance of the journey and the idea that the deepest spiritual truths are often found within oneself or in the physical world around us, rather than through rigid doctrine.
So that deeply informed the structure of The Alchemist.
Exactly, where the protagonist travels vast distances seeking an external treasure, only to realize the treasure was waiting for him at home all along. It gives the novel's simple language a much deeper, centuries-old resonance for those readers who recognize that mystical lineage.
And once that global fuse was lit, Coelho proved he was far from a one-hit wonder. He transitioned into an incredibly prolific, high-volume author.
His consistent production schedule, it speaks to an intense discipline. He has generally written at least one novel every 2 years since the global success of The Alchemist. And this commitment to output is what sustains his commercial scope, which is just extraordinary.
And we must reiterate those defining statistics, as they are so central to the debate over his legacy. 320 million copies sold, published in over 170 countries, translated into 83 languages.
These are numbers that place him in a category usually reserved for the biggest fantasy or thriller franchises, not philosophical parables.
It's amazing.
To help the learner put his huge output into context, we can break down his novels into a few key categories, as detailed in the sources. His work is generally split into 3 areas.
The first category is defined by the highly personal and often autobiographical novels, where his own dramatic life experiences are the core narrative.
Exactly. These include The Pilgrimage, which chronicled his life-changing Camino walk, along with subsequent intensely personal works like The Valkyries, Aleph, and Hippie.
So these books give the reader an intimate look at the dramatic events of his life.
His spiritual searching, his past, his relationships, all framed within a novelistic structure.
Then you have the novels that are more broadly fictional. But his third category that involves works that are almost directly instructional or reflective, bridging the gap between narrative and guidance.
That's right. The third category comprises collections of essays, newspaper columns, or direct teachings, which often provide explicit guidance or philosophical nuggets to the reader. Titles like Maktub, which is Arabic for "It is written," the Manual of the Warrior of Light, and Like the Flowing River fall into this space.
So this blend of personal narrative, pure parable, and direct teaching creates a complete body of work that sustains his massive, dedicated global readership.
He gives the reader both the story and the lesson.
We have established his titanic global commercial success, charting his incredible journey from institutionalized rebel to publishing giant. But now we encounter the great, enduring contradiction that defines his entire career, the profound, consistent critical dissension he faces from the literary establishment.
This duality is arguably the most fascinating aspect of his legacy. It shows a massive disconnect between the popular and the academic worlds. On one hand, he is recognized as immensely influential.
I mean, the sources list him highly.
Including his placement as number 2 on Richtopia's 200 most influential contemporary authors in 2016. He is a cultural force. On the other hand, his writing has faced intense, consistent, and specific criticism from reviewers and literary critics.
It truly seems like the critics and the 320 million readers are living in 2 completely separate universes when it comes to judging the value and quality of his work. What are the specific, recurring arguments that literary reviewers consistently levy against his writing?
The primary critique, it revolves around what critics perceive as the superficiality of his prose and the lack of philosophical depth in his later novels. Reviewers, particularly those from major publications, consistently target his accessible, often minimalist writing style, arguing that the parables are too simplistic.
So they're saying it's too easy.
Essentially, the sources cite specific reviews of books like The Zahir and The Spy that focused heavily on this perceived lack of complexity or sophistication.
The implication is that while his themes, destiny, searching, finding love, resonate universally, the execution itself lacks the literary complexity or nuance that critics traditionally demand of major literary works.
He is accused of making profound concepts too easy, and this raises a fundamental question about the nature of literature. Does a message that impacts 320 million people, many of whom are non-traditional readers who rarely pick up a novel, lose its value if it is communicated in simple, direct, parable-like language?
That's a great question.
Critics value layers of prose and ambiguity. His readers, apparently, value clarity, emotional resonance, and the promise inherent in his narrative. The sheer magnitude of his sales suggests that accessibility and clarity trump complexity for the vast majority of the global audience.
So his ability to create a universal, easy-to-digest narrative is actually a feature for his audience, not a bug. His success suggests that the appetite for inspirational, accessible spiritual guidance is far larger than the appetite for highbrow literary complexity.
It connects back to his earlier career as a journalist and theater director. He knows exactly how to pace a narrative and structure dialogue for immediate comprehension and maximum emotional impact. He's writing parables for a global, hyper-connected, and, sometimes distracted world.
The contradictions also extend into the realm of faith and philosophy, which is an interesting tension point. He was raised Catholic and still describes himself as of that faith, yet his spiritual perspective has drawn fire from within those traditional religious structures.
There is a distinct tension that has led to significant debate. Despite his self-identification as Catholic, his philosophical stance has been described by some religious commentators as incompatible with rigid Catholic doctrine.
And what specifically is the clash? What ideas of his cause this friction?
The criticism centers on his inclusion of what are termed New Age, pantheist, and relativist contents in his spiritual explorations.
Okay, break that down for us.
So pantheism is the belief that God is in everything and everything is God, which can clash with the traditional view of a singular transcendent deity. Relativism, in this context, suggests that truth is subjective and personal rather than being determined by fixed universal doctrine.
So he's simultaneously too simple for the literary establishment and too spiritually fluid or nonconformist for traditional religious adherents. He truly thrives in that independent space, speaking directly to those who feel unrepresented by either academic literature or rigid religious dogma.
He occupies the space of the independent spiritual seeker. He's a voice that validates the millions of people who are searching for meaning outside of established, organized structures. And this position naturally draws both immense devotion from readers and strong opposition from establishment figures, whether they're literary, academic, or religious.
He's a destabilizing force in several worlds.
He is.
Now, let's look at a few truly intriguing personal anecdotes that show his sensitivity and engagement with contemporary figures, moving beyond the traditional image of a solitary, philosophical novelist.
The story involving basketball legend Kobe Bryant is a powerful illustration of his unique global reach. Kobe was approached by Bryant, who had read his work and wanted to discuss a children's book project focusing on overcoming adversity and finding inspiration.
That's amazing.
They actually began writing the book together some months before Bryant's tragic death in January 2020.
Wow. That sounds like an incredible creative partnership, bridging the gap between global sports iconography, the ultimate competitor, and global literary spirituality, the ultimate seeker.
It was an unfinished venture, which makes Coelho's ultimate decision following the tragedy even more dramatic and revealing of his personal values. Following Bryant's death, Coelho announced that he had decided to delete the entire unfinished draft.
Wait, he deleted the whole thing? A commercially guaranteed bestseller, linking a global sports icon and a global literary giant.
He did. He stated that it didn't make any sense to publish without him. He erased months of creative work out of respect and grief, essentially overriding the enormous commercial temptation to publish something related to a deceased global icon.
That's incredible.
We don't know the title or exactly how many pages have been written, but the decision highlights a profound sense of emotional integrity. He prioritized personal respect over market gain.
That decision underscores the personal, emotionally driven nature of his entire creative process. It confirms that the authenticity of the relationship and the message means more to him than another 10 million sales.
And if we look at his personal life, he has managed to maintain stability despite the career chaos and global pressures. He has been married to the artist Christina Wojtyszka since 1980.
A long time.
Yeah.
And their lifestyle has shifted dramatically with his global status and fame. They used to split their time between Rio de Janeiro and a French country house in the Pyrenees.
Right, kind of a bohemian setup.
But now they reside permanently in Geneva, Switzerland. This final home is fitting, perhaps, for a writer whose appeal is so transnational. a writer whose work belongs to the world and transcends specific national borders, even though he remains fiercely proud of his Brazilian roots.
And this global profile also led to a biographical film, The Pilgrim Story of Paulo Coelho, which premiered internationally in 2015 and sought to capture the complexity of this life.
And one of the producers, Iona de Macedo, she perfectly captured the essence of his early struggle and eventual success with a fantastic quote that summarizes the core tension of his life.
What was the producer's description?
She said, "The film tells the story of a man who has a dream. It's a little like Alice in Wonderland. He's someone who is too big for his house."
That statement neatly summarizes the tension we've been discussing for the entire deep dive. The massive rebellious spirit, initially constrained by the narrow definitions of family expectations, psychiatric confinement, and violent state oppression.
Until he finally found a form, the global parable, big enough to contain him.
And ultimately, that dream was realized not just commercially and internationally, but institutionally in Brazil, confirming his place in the literary pantheon back home, despite all the controversy he continues to generate.
Indeed. His induction into the Brazilian Academy of Letters, taking chair 21, is the final, ultimate piece of the paradox puzzle. The former dissident, the hippie, the man whose work was once deemed superficial by the literati, is now enshrined as a national literary treasure.
Seated amongst the very establishment he spent his youth rebelling against, the arc is complete.
What a profound and radical journey we've charted for you today. We have moved from a teenager institutionalized by his loving but misguided parents to an adult tortured by the state for his art, to achieving undeniable global literary dominance and claiming his place as Chair 21 in the Brazilian Academy of Letters.
The synthesis is clear. Coelho's narrative is powerful not merely because of the simplistic nature of his sales, but because his entire life embodies the themes of radical personal transformation and spiritual searching that he writes about.
He is the living embodiment of his most famous theme.
The warrior of light who follows his personal legend. His success is built on the fact that he was willing to suffer for that legend, whether that suffering came from family pressure, political violence, or initial commercial rejection.
His story underscores the enduring power of a single, deeply personal and highly accessible narrative to connect universally with readers who are also navigating their own complex lives, deferred dreams, and sense of unfulfilled purpose.
He offers them a map drawn from his own life to find the treasure.
So we've confirmed that The Alchemist was initially a profound commercial failure, selling only 900 copies before being dropped. We also confirmed that critics consistently label his later work as superficial or lightweight, focusing on the prose.
Right.
Considering these hard facts, the initial flop and the consistent criticism, we must leave you with a final provocative question to mull over. If the prose is often criticized, and the ideas are seen as simplistic by the intellectual elite, what element, unseen or undervalued by critics but clearly felt by those 320 million readers, truly defines the magnetic core of his enduring global success?
Is the ultimate value rooted in the written word? Or is the deeper psychological appeal rooted in the simple, uncompromising promise of the incredible journey he himself undertook?
Think about that as you navigate your own path this week.